You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
You're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, a fun and informative show for riders, owners, trainers, grooms, and fans of all levels.
I'm Ashley Winch in Kansas City, Missouri.
And I'm Kristy McCormick in Saratoga Springs, New York. And you're listening to the Show Jumping Podcast, where we deliver at-home riding exercises to our listeners and chat with fellow horse enthusiasts about the world of show jumping.
And we're happy to highlight our title sponsor, Relyne GI. Relyne GI is a natural, long-term alternative that goes beyond masking symptoms. This unique blend of gut-friendly hyaluronan and wellness-boosting beta-glucan works with your horse's body to soothe and protect their digestive system. Unlike traditional therapies that can disrupt digestion and nutrient absorption, Relyne GI leaves your horse's natural balance intact. But don't take our word for it. Relyne GI is field tested by leading veterinarians and backed by peer-reviewed research, including a study by Dr. Nathan Slovis showing it effectively reduces gastric ulcers in active horses. Plus, it's clean sport certified, safe for competition use. Don't forget to use code SJP at checkout for 10% off, linked in our show notes.
We are joined today again by my friend Jaimie, who was here last time. We had a great time then, didn't we, Jaime?
We had a blast. Hi, everyone.
And we're also joined by Jaimie's friend Nickki Odonobian, who is a show barn manager for a top jumper barn, who has a lot of experience showing in Europe and the States. And Jaimie, you do as well. Actually, I do too. We all do. I kind of forgot that I even went there. So I thought it'd be fun to just talk about some of the differences between Europe and American showing. Well, it was so long ago. I feel like that was a different lifetime. My goodness. Nickki, hi, how are you?
Hi, guys.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what your current position is?
Sure. So I've been, I suppose, professionally grooming, I would say, for the last maybe 10 years in show jumping. I did another discipline before that for about 5 years. But I've been part-time really between America and Europe, 6 months in Europe. And then we used to come to Florida for the winters with Dara Kinney's barn, Oakland Stables. So I was his main show groom for a lot of that time. And now I've fallen into a somewhat, I suppose, simpler life. I kind of joke and call it my retirement life. I'm full-time now with a girl called Hallie Grimes here in America since January last year. And I just manage her day-to-day barn. I do a lot of the FEI shows with her and anything to do with entries, passports, vets, farriers. I try to keep on top of all of that.
Do you call yourself in retirement because of your job description or because you're in the States versus being in Europe?
I think because in terms of, I think when you're so fast paced for so many years, a lot of us do it so strenuously, you never take a moment. And this job has benefited in the sense that I can take time for myself now. It's not as fast paced, there's not as many horses. It's still top level, and it's still we're still going to 4 and 5 star shows every week. But I find it a lot more lenient. And I think when you get to, well, I don't know, I don't want to throw out any ages anywhere, but I feel like at my age, I needed something quieter, something where I can maybe eventually, set roots somewhere. So that's kind of my term, retirement, where that comes in.
Right. Sure. And by age, we'll just say north of 35 for all of us.
I'm still south of that.
Oh my goodness. Well, then you're a baby and you have plenty of time to retire. My goodness.
I know. Yeah.
For everyone else listening, this is not a video chat, so I cannot see Nickki, and I am not guessing her age on how she looks, but she is talking like she is in her upward
mentally, mentally
yes.
I am.
Oh goodness. Well, do you have any, as much as you may love retirement here in the States and how quiet your job is now, which sounds lovely. What do you think of the fast pace that America horse shows can, kind of lead to versus European shows?
I would say I wouldn't really class any shows in America as fast paced now anymore, really. When I think about Europe, I still have my truck license. I used to get into a truck on, a Tuesday morning or a Tuesday night. And, some weeks I'm driving 10 hours straight to get to my destination with 3 or 4 horses in the back, all your equipment. You get there, you're unloading everything yourself for 3 or 4 days. You turn around and you come home, At least over here, for the majority of it, if we're going somewhere far, you get to go for 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
And you get
set
that
up and
breathing
stay.
space. Yeah, you get that breathing space. In Europe, you don't. You get home, you change your horses, and you hit the road again, and
Right.
that is exhausting.
Do you feel like you get any sleep when you're on the road like that?
No. No, I
Not
do
one
not.
bit.
Normally, what you'll find in Europe is you will walk down the aisle of a show and you will find a lot of grooms sleeping on the aisle. We have our deck chairs and our hammocks, and especially the winter time when you have your World Cup season and your classes are starting. Some classes are starting at 10 p.m.,
Yeah.
Or even Miami, for example, you can only exercise the horses at 6 a.m. and your class isn't until afternoon. So that's when we sleep in the middle of the day when
the
you
breaks.
have a moment. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Jaimie, were your experiences similar when you were working over there?
Well, luckily for me, I don't have a truck license, so I didn't have to deal with the driving part
Also
of
be
it.
the driver? Yep.
And that was kind of the most, when I first started going to Europe, the most impressive part of it to me was the hours that the grooms worked and then got in the truck and drove the horses home, swapped the horses over, left again for another horse show. And I personally couldn't do that part of it. I just couldn't do it. So I have a lot of respect for everybody that does. And, Nickki and I have spent many hours on the phone while she's driving to and from horse shows. And the timing works out that, the time difference works out. And so that we could kind of talk during those odd hours. And I was just always so impressed that she was still going and still doing it. And, it's a very hard life, but it's impressiff.
Well, and it's a lot of responsibility, right? To take on just getting in the truck and being in charge of those horses, not just at the horse show and taking care of them, but then transporting them. I mean, America has how many businesses that we rely on here for commercial shippers? And do commercial shippers exist in Europe, actually?
Oh, yeah, they do. And one thing I will say is I was very lucky when I was driving the truck because not a lot of employers are nice enough to provide their groom with an extra driver to help them, or they might not allow them to leave in enough time where you can do a proper layover. So I was very lucky. If I needed a driver, I could have a driver. Of course, it costs a lot of money to have someone drive with you. But at the end of the day, the horses, you and everybody else on the road around you needs to be safe,
Are safer,
Um,
sure.
exactly. And if I had to stop for a layover, then yeah, I did that.
Well,
But
and
then, like, if you're driving on your own and then you're still, even though you're stopping for a layover, you're still having to unload the horses and take care of them. And that cuts into your potential time to get some rest.
Your rest
And
time,
then,
exactly.
and I just, it's the most impressive. It's just such an impressive thing to me, because like, I could do it all, but I couldn't add the driving part of it. I just, like I said before, it would stress me out too much that I would get tired, that something would happen. Like, the ability to do it is there, but I suppose it's a desire to do it also that I just kind of don't have to do the driving part of it.
Well, and how that's just so much to ask for one person too, to especially, let's say you have a Grand Prix at 10 p.m. and that class isn't over until 12 or 1 in the morning, and to either have to get in the truck then and drive, or just sleep for 6 hours and then go again the next day, depending on where you have to get to. It's just, I think the caretakers of the horses, both especially in Europe, but also here, are asked to do so much.
Yeah, and there's some shows you go to also where, yeah, your class finishes really late and you'd love to be able to have a sleep, but it's in such a major city, they have a time frame where they need to get those stables down and they need you out of there.
Sure, right, to take down the whole event.
Yeah, so they're hustling, they're getting the trucks in and they're getting you out, and there's no rest. You just got to keep going.
Do you have any stories that are, sort of funny now, but maybe not funny at the time, of trying to get out of a horse show?
Ooh,
Or to a horse show?
Not necessarily funny, but like, for example, like in Paris at the Global, how they park you was just insane. And I remember there a few years ago, I was parked like on top of an entrance for a subway that they had closed off. And I was up on maybe a 3-foot high curb, and there was trees everywhere around me, and I needed to get out. And if I was to drop my left wheel down off the curb, my whole truck was going to ricochet off all of these trees. And I think there must have been about 20 men around me trying to maneuver me out of this tiny little space. And I still, to this day, I don't know how I did it without hitting the truck off anything. But
You're just that good, Nickki. You're full of talent.
Did anybody who worked at Subway try to come out and help you if you were right there?
No, it was the subway, the underground train.
Like the underground subway.
Oh gosh. Do they actually have subways in Europe?
Yeah.
I was there one time. I've already forgotten, obviously.
They brought her a foot long to help her out, and then she was on her way.
That would have been great. At least she would have had a snack.
Yeah, exactly. Or, what I used to love is I'd be, driving down the highway in my big truck, and okay, like I'm blonde and whatever and young, and you'd have
clearly younger than us.
And there'd be these big burly men driving their trucks, overtaking me, and they look, and when they see me, they'd like be pointing to their friend, being like, oh my God, like, look at this young girl driving the big truck.
You're like one of those macho truck drivers along with them. Do you transport the horses here in the States too?
No. Okay, we have like our own little Stefex van, so that's lovely. But no, we use shippers over here. And there is a lot of shippers in Europe also. But, when it comes to having your own truck in Europe, I know the driving is just insane. But to get to a show and get into your own bed and not have to go find a hotel. Like a lot of those trucks come with their own living quarters. You can keep all your grain in the side of the truck, your spare equipment. If you go with a haulage company, you're taking everything out, every single last bit of stuff that you need, and you're hauling it to the stable. You need to find your hotel.
You have no storage except for what's there. Yeah,
exactly. So I actually, at the end of the day, I loved going on my truck.
Yeah. And you, just to clarify too, again, for our listeners, the living quarters mean you would just stay in that lorry as well as, that was like a camper and a trailer all in one, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's hugely convenient.
You'd press a button, the side would pop out, you'd press another button and the top would pop up, and you had your kitchen and your shower.
It's your traveling home.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's so much comfort just having it there on the showgrounds.
Stefix really has a lot of those vans as well now. They have the little ones here that people use as practically like cars to transport around Wellington, right?
Yeah.
But they still have the large ones in Europe, correct?
Yeah, they do. And if for some reason it never became a hit over here, I want to say someone tried it at some point and they just couldn't make it work.
Yeah, I think at least going and setting up for 2 weeks, you do have a chance to, kind of move into a Airbnb or a hotel or something like that. But yeah, they would be convenient here too. Certainly people do have campers that they travel in.
And when I think about it, like this summer I drove to Michigan in my own pickup, and it took me the same amount of hours as I would have driven a truck in Europe. So it's not like, you're never going to go drive from the East Coast to the West Coast in your own personal truck. Like that's not going to happen. So the distance that we drive here for shows is practically the same distance we would drive weekly in Europe. So I don't really understand why they haven't been brought over here, or why they didn't, catch on.
Well, and I think like the commercial shippers have such a huge business over here too. People get attached to, supporting those businesses. And I mean, Jaimie, I remember working for North Run together with you, and we would load out of Florida, like 5 vans at least of 8 horses each?
8 to 10 in equipment. Yeah. Like the trucks hold a lot of horses and a lot of equipment, but it is significantly different transporting horses, in my opinion, over here than it is over there. And as with anything, change takes a bit of time to get used to. But the more time I spent in Europe and the more time I spent using the lorries there and kind of getting used to how the European life works, I so much prefer it. And my transport company over here is amazing. They're wonderful, but there's a significant difference in the trucks as far as even something just like sound. Like the trucks in Europe are, in my opinion, so quiet and nice for the horses, and the ones here, there's a lot of chains and rattling and stuff like that. And it's a lot, they're just as safe. They're just as nice, but it's just, you ride in the back of the truck with the horses, as we all have done. And it's loud in the trucks over here. And, the horses spend a lot of time in those trucks, and you would imagine that it gets annoying for us. So you would imagine it gets annoying for them too, to just listen to the chains banging all the time. And that's my only, if I had to be picky, that's kind of my biggest issue with the trucks over here. It's not the companies themselves or the people or anything. It's just, there's a lot of noise in the back of the trucks here.
And I feel
that's just my opinion.
The trucks over here also, I feel like, haven't really developed. They haven't,
they kind of are what they are and have been for a long time.
They haven't tried to improve them. The ramps terrify me.
Yeah.
And, everyone now has these European trunks. Trying to get one of those up a ramp that has a 2-foot step at the top of it.
It takes 6 people.
It's torture. It's a death wish.
Speaking of what horses must find uncomfortable, and surprisingly, they do so well with it. Jaimie, can you talk about, and Nickki, you have this experience too, flying with horses? Like the first time that you flew with horses to Europe, what was that like?
Terrifying.
Who wants to go first?
Jaimie can go.
I think for me, the first time I did it, I was genuinely handed an envelope full of some paperwork and loaded the horses, and my employer said, "See you in a few weeks." And I was like, okay, here we go. I had never been to Europe before, never mind traveling with the horses. And it's such a major thing to do, but like I've been doing it forever now. And I think the horses prefer getting on a plane as opposed to getting on a truck. And it's so common for them, of course, like people, there's some that like it less than others, but like it's such a well-oiled machine for the most part, how the horses get on and off the plane. And like, customs can be a bit of a weight and a pain in the butt, but I think it's so normal to most show horses now to get on an airplane and travel. It's just like people that travel.
It's like us flying.
For work. Yeah. And like, obviously there's a lot of things that can go wrong and it's scary, but like after doing it for so long, it's nicer for the horses and it's kind of nicer for us. I don't know what your opinion is, Nickki, but like, you're on a cargo plane with your horses and, there's 6 or 8 seats for other grooms and airline grooms and the pilots and stuff. And you're allowed to kind of like move around and check the horses when you want to. And it's kind of a nicer way to travel for everybody.
Yeah, I've had, So I've had, I think, maybe 2 different experiences. Like there was once where, maybe there was 10 show grooms. We were going to like a global or something and we were all squished in together. And I was like, oh my God, like this is going to be torture. And then like the flights from Amsterdam into Miami, it's like you're flying business class up over the horses.
Yeah.
It's so nice. And, help yourself to the food and the drink and everything. And I will say, I was very surprised, and I'm still surprised to this day at how calm the horses are, even first timers when it comes to flying.
Mm-hmm.
And people always say to me, oh my God, I can't believe you fly horses. Like, do you ever have to sedate them? Never. I've never, ever, ever seen a horse get sedated to go on a flight.
I had one that I used to travel with that had to get sedated. We were flying, I don't remember the exact details of, I want to say we were flying like JFK into Germany or something like that. And the pilot could hear the horse kicking and came into where we were all sitting and was like, you guys have to do something about this. So he was a bit of he was special, but that's the only time that I've had to sedate a horse in flight. And it was, as terrifying as it sounds, but it was safer. You can't give them too much, obviously. They have to be able to hold themselves up, but you can give them just enough to kind of take the edge off and make it safer for everybody. And, you don't want them to kick for a 9-hour flight and hurt themselves.
It's like people who fly who needed a Xanax just to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He needed a cocktail just like everybody else.
He needed a cocktail.
I couldn't have one.
Why they serve alcohol on planes. That's right.
Yeah.
I think the first time I flew, actually, I remember being up there with the in-flight groom, and she was like, okay, it's your first time. She says, just make sure you always bring the oxygen down with you. And I'm like, oh God, why do I need a drum of oxygen with me? Like, what's going to happen?
Why would I ever need that?
Yeah.
There's some flights too that are like, they're called combination flights. So like the front of the plane would be passengers and then the back of the plane is cargo. And obviously like the grooms, we traveled kind of like in the back of the passenger part so you can get to and from the horses very easily. But the whole flight, you get up and you check on them, and we would come back. And when we landed, this lady in front of me was like, what are you guys doing back there? Like, we're covered in hay and shavings and we smell bad and you can hear the horses screaming. And they're like, it was, to normal people who don't understand, even it does sound crazy too to people that know what they're doing. But like, just the fact that there's horses behind the passengers on a plane just heading to Europe and like,
So that means
wild.
That there are people on the plane that are unaware that there are horses behind them.
They just think that the back half of the plane is cargo, and they, why would you assume that would mean there were living animals back there? You just assume cargo means like,
machine guns
whatever.
Or something.
If that's where your brain wants to go, sure.
I was thinking,
whatever,
exotic flowers from Brazil.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I would have said something other than machine guns. But
I just finished watching the show Reacher, and so it just seemed to make sense.
So you got machine guns on the plane.
Yeah, exactly. All right, tell me about a couple horror stories that you guys have run into and showing over there that, again, maybe are a little funnier now than they were at the time.
Ooh, horror stories. I can, it's not really at a show, but we were flying one time and I suppose there must have been 50 horses on the flight, and one of them was pretty bad, had kick pads all around, and he pulled his kick pad down underneath him and was freaking out. And I'm like, okay, he can't freak out for 10 hours. Like, I need to get the kick pad. And stupidly, I went in to get the kick pad and he kicked me. And I was like, okay, that's the last time I'm going to help something in the
Yeah,
crate.
better to leave him alone.
Okay, yeah, I know. You have to, it's like a juggle. You're like, okay, it's 50-50. You can go in there and risk something happening you, or what's going to happen to horse for the next 10 hours,
And keep in mind, like, it sounds like when we're talking about it, when you go to check the horses, you have a ton of space and you're just wandering around in a cargo plane and like doing whatever
like Reacher. There's all that space in those back of those planes.
But like, you literally can barely have enough room to walk between the containers that the horses are in and the wall of the plane. And, when you're in the container with the horses, there's hay nets hanging, there's big water jugs on the ground. Like, you're not talking like you have a ton of room to do the right thing and to make decisions in. Like, there's limited space, like very limited space. So you come out of the containers and you have to go under the hay nets to get to the second horse on the inside of the container.
You're climbing around.
You have hay everywhere, and it's not as luxurious as it sounds.
It's not glamorous, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Flying with the horses.
Like,
to
you don't
Europe.
wear your best clothes on the flight. You just kind of, you get by.
Nickki, what is your when you're showing in Europe in the summertime? And again, I assume when you say 6 months and 6 months, the 6 months of the winter you're in Florida or with Dara, was that right? And then the other 6 months you're in the summertime over there.
Exactly.
Can you tell us any fun stories about just, showing over there in general? It doesn't have to be transporting, but maybe something crazy that, sorry, Dara, we're calling you out on this. We're all very good friends with Dara. We'll just, and he probably will never listen to this podcast, so we're safe. I don't know, something crazy that he might have asked you to do. Actually, in fact, all three of us have worked with Dara too. That's an interesting fact, separately.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say he's ever asked anything crazy. Off the top of my head, no.
Everything went smooth as silk all the time?
Listen, not all the time, but
I think compared to a lot of riders, he's pretty easy in the sense that there's not a lot of like outrageous asks and like, crazy things that he would expect done by one person. But like, you hear other grooms talk about just the hours and the demands, and it is pretty crazy. But I I personally don't really have any like holy moly moments that are like crazy, but just
I think I count myself quite lucky in terms of a lot of other people what you would hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't it true at European horse shows, again, from what I remember a long time ago, we really focus on one horse at a time. And here it feels like, we're sort of going from class to class and horse to horse. Is that your sense as well, Nickki?
Yeah.
Or Jaimie?
For me, going to a show in Europe and you only have your FEI is just amazing. And then over here, you can bring your nationals, you can bring your hunters, your eck horses, and all your FEI. You can bring everyone together, the whole family. It's like a party, and you're just running. Yeah, you'd be running around like even here now. Like we have one in Sarasota this week, one in FEI at WEF, and if we wanted to, we could have 6 showing national. We don't, luckily. But in Europe, you go to a show, and if it's a 5-star show, you only have your 2 or 3 horses. And for the last maybe 3 or 4 years with Dara, I was quite lucky. A lot of the time, I only had my one horse. I would have either Baloo or Cartello, and I would go with that one horse, and it was pretty nice, pretty cushy.
But you also, the other nice part for me was like, there are times for everything. Like on the start order, there's like the time that you're going to go in the ring, and those times stick for the most part. Like,
yeah,
there's no waiting around. There's no, hey, I need 5 more minutes. There's no, it is what it is. And you go when you go, and nobody cares who you might be or what you might be doing. Like, the schedule is the schedule, and I found that unbelievably amazing, especially coming from here.
So one thing I found the Americans don't appreciate too much about European shows is sharing a fence in the warm-up.
Oh my God, that is the most terrifying. The first few years I went to Europe, the most terrifying experience of my life was sharing jumps in the warm-up. Like, I was just this timid little, hi, I'm from America. And they're like, oh, we're going to eat you up.
Jaimie, can you, since you've started in America and then had the European experience, can you share for our listeners the experience of the schooling area and how that's different?
Well, in America, for the most part, unless you're at the Global in Miami or, a few other horse shows, you have a warm-up jump that is your own. Like, if there's 4 jumps in the arena, you jump when you're 4 out, and it's a math equation. Like, you just
it's a rotational, who's 4 out, who's 3,
what your jump is, and you go there and you have that jump to yourself, and it's very nice and easy. And then you go to Europe and there's 2 or 3 jumps in the warm-up. And Nickki, correct me if I'm wrong, but normally there's 2 oxers, 1 vertical, kind of something like that. And there's not a lot of... Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes just 2 jumps, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of changing allowed. And you have 4 people using the same jump, and you're trying to adjust it, and you're getting yelled at because there's a rider coming, and like,
you just jump whatever stressful. Everybody else is jumping. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to learn how to warm up differently. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between here and there. And I think even, it's scary enough for us. It's like crossing a 50-lane highway. But I think even the riders have to get used to it too, And you either jump what's there and go, or you maybe don't jump, and it's a free for all. And some people are nicer than others, but
some people scary. Just want to go up by 1 hole every time, and you're like, come on, we got places to be.
You got to move a little faster than that.
Well, right, and you guys are talking about classes that jump, up to 5-foot jumps, and you don't have that much time to get ready.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And everybody, for the most part, thinks they're more important than the other people trying to jump the jump. So, like, and the grooms too,
Oh.
you know, like everybody thinks that their rider is more important and they need more jumps or they need this or that. And like, it's kind of, you know, you try to be nice and try to make it all work. And sometimes it
And then you get
goes
run
well
over.
and sometimes it doesn't.
I will
Yeah, the
say
egos
now,
in the schooling area. Oof.
Yeah.
I will say now, like, okay, I haven't experienced Europe in a while, but now that we have the rule where we can't have landing rails and things like
Yeah.
this anymore, that's going to make life so easy in Europe, because there's
Mhm.
nothing worse than your rider wanting a landing rail and nobody else wants it, and you're running in and out with that rail.
Yeah. So again, for our
Literally risking
listeners,
your life.
so Nickki, I'll explain quickly what a landing rail is, but just imagine a little blonde girl holding a 12-foot pole in her hands that's already pretty heavy and running out to the backside of a jump that somebody probably is coming at her, towards her to jump it, just to set it precisely 9 feet or further away from the jump so her horse can land properly, and then immediately going and grabbing it. So that timing is very difficult, even when you're only dealing with your own rider that may or may not be aware that you're setting that. And I can only, not only now are you crossing a 50-lane highway of these horses, but you're trying to literally not get crushed while you're being jumped. And yeah, that is terrifying. So that I wasn't aware of that. That's a new rule that we don't do that in schooling areas there.
Yeah, that's a new
Yeah.
FBI rule in general. No landing rails.
Well, and isn't there something to, I mean, again, let's compare it to the States where even in the hunter ring, right? We can get so complicated, and landing rails and guide rails and flags and towels and all this crap on the ground and Liverpools. Sometimes I think we make it so overcomplicated for the horses in the schooling area that we wear their minds out before we even go in the ring.
100%. 100%.
And so maybe in Europe, they've got a little simpler attitude, and that's easier.
But
I agree.
Yeah, for sure. Like, when I see these poor people hauling Liverpools, these fully big, huge Liverpools, not even yoga mats, Liverpools.
Not even the yoga mats that
showground.
we all jump.
And I'm like, these poor misfortunes, you could not pay me to
Mhm.
do that. I would refuse
Mhm.
blank. And you don't get that in Europe. You don't walk around with a Liverpool in Europe or a mat or anything.
Yeah, you jump the
You just
rails,
jumps.
and then you go in the ring and jump what's in there. Yeah, you just jump. Yeah.
But that, to your point, it does make you realize that it doesn't have to be as complicated as it kind of can get over here. And that's not to say that, like, I'm not saying Europe is better or America is better. I just think that, you know, when you start to venture a little bit and see how other people do things, it does make you realize that there's a simpler way and it doesn't have to be so difficult. And like, you know, Nickki and I, as much as we've gone to the same shows in Europe and America and have traveled the world with the horses, like, for me, it was learning how to go from being the little American girl going to Europe and realizing there's a whole nother world out there. Nickki had to learn how to be, you know, from the European system coming over here. So we have that. As much as we're the same, it was a very, at least for me, I think it's a very different experience kind of going one way to the other.
I think I was very lucky in a sense, though, because Dara was very Americanized, as you guys know. So the system I walked into, even though it was European, it was very much American.
Yeah.
You know, like in Europe, you're not feeding at 4 p.m. Oh my God, if you go into a barn in the Netherlands and you're going with feed buckets at 4 p.m., you're getting your backside handed to you, you know? And for a European barn, that's what we used to do. We used to feed at 4. We kept the American system very much, even when we were in Europe.
So European barns, you would feed much later, right?
Absolutely. If you're done riding by 5,
like a
you're
person,
lucky.
maybe. Yeah, like
Yeah,
a
like,
person's eating schedule.
and in terms of the ratio of horses to grooms, like you don't have that in European barns. You've got maybe one person and one flat rider for 10 horses.
Right. It did always amaze me how much we got done with way fewer people in Europe than we do here. And I don't know if that means, again, we're complicating it here in the States and we have so many things to do, meaning, preparing them in the morning and making sure that they have, 15 million kinds of pieces of tack and boots and 8 classes per day or per horse show, I should say. And they're just as same thing as going to the ring with one horse at a time and one class at a time.
But that's the difference, right? Like you go to a show like where we are at WEF and you need all of the staff that you can possibly get because, you go to the ring with a hunter and you're at the ring maybe from the beginning of the class until the jog. And like that person
which could be 2 hours.
Yeah. And that person who's at the ring isn't back at the barn able to do any work because they're waiting at the show. And like, then you have an equitation horse and then, there's just a lot, not that it's wasted time, but there's a lot of time per groom spent at the ring compared to in Europe. Like I said, like you go, you jump, maybe you wait for a jump off. If you have enough time, you go back to the stable, you ice quickly, you do whatever you can. But like time management in America is you have to be so on top of your game.
Yeah. And I think that's a big difference in Europe is that you have more time to take care of the horses properly and you aren't running from ring to ring and class to class, which makes a big difference for the horses primarily, much less the people.
Well, and I think also like at home at a barn in Europe, I feel like in America, there's a lot of focus on we got to wash the legs. We got to do this. In Europe, like horses don't get bad legs. They don't get bad skin.
Yeah.
They don't get anything like that.
Horses are horses. They're not bubble wrapped.
Like they're not. And like I said, you're 2 people with your 10 horses. They're thrown out in the field and they're pulled back in. The same bridle is probably used on all those 10 horses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not 100% pristine, but they're still taken care of.
They're still being taken care of and they're still getting,
we're still doing the same job.
Care.
Yeah. It's just less fancy maybe.
I like that word, fancy pantsy. I think that's very, very accurate.
The new professional term quoted by Nickki.
Fancy. I did think of a bit of a funny story, actually, just going back to the fences.
Yes, go.
So it might have been maybe 5 or 6 years ago in the international warm-up here at WEF, and it was a certain Irish rider's, not my previous rider, but another Irish rider, his first time in the US, and he's like warming up and he's like, Nickki, can I jump your vertical? I said, sure, yeah, like but once I go up, like I'm going up, but you can jump it until then, like, or you follow us. And he's like, but like where's my fence? I goes, well, you need to wait. There's 4 fences here. And I looked at the list and I goes, you're 8 out. Like, you have loads of time. You're good. He's, no, I need to jump. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I promise you, take your fence when you're 4 out. And he would not have it. And it came to him getting his fence anyway. And he was eventually, it was taking forever until he was called to the ring. And he was like, oh yeah, I did warm up too early, didn't I? And I was like, I told you, you just wouldn't listen to me. So he had wasted all his jumps and didn't realize
he was still 5 out.
Yeah.
And isn't that, so I remember the opposite happening when I went to Europe to show and to ride, and I didn't understand at the national shows or even the local shows, you have 3 riders in the ring at the same time. And I, first of all, the language barrier is a thing. When you don't understand Dutch, that's hard to figure out what you're doing.
I don't think
And
anyone understands Dutch. Oh my God.
I don't think even the
I
people
don't
who
even know
speak
if they
Dutch do. This is the hardest language to follow. But
It's so difficult.
I really you can figure out, down a list when the orders are, but I suddenly realized I was supposed to be in the ring next and I hadn't jumped a jump at all. And
Yeah.
because, you don't just go when your slot is, you go into the ring to be ready to go when you're, maybe
When you're
3
2 or
out.
3
And
out.
yeah. And so that concept for me was like, holy, so I remember our first few times jumping like 5-year-olds over, maybe a meter 20 oxer as jump one just to get ready and go right in the ring when I didn't have the time. And it got to be jarring for the Europeans, same thing, to come here. Like you said, Jaimie, both ways. The concepts and the culture for just competing at all are so different.
That's kind of where, in my opinion, that's kind of where you can tell like the European grooms that have been in America before versus the ones that haven't, because everybody looks lost in the schooling ring. You know what I mean? Like
right.
it's just, and you try to help, make everybody understand. And it's just such a foreign concept when you're first figuring it all out.
And mind you, we're all getting ready for these classes where the jumps are pretty big. So as much as we would like to keep it simple, you still would like to jump, the height you're jumping.
You want to do it your way.
Get in there and do it your way. Exactly. And what you think your horse needs. And can you imagine what these horses must think of us and what we do to ask of them before they go in? I mean, I would think some of them, and I know some of them really do get pumped up to compete and show. I mean, I don't know. Do you think that they're like, okay, I've jumped 2 jumps, I'm ready, and then we jump 18 more? Like, no, you're not ready yet. I don't know. I
but
just
it's
think they must think that we're
sometimes
bizarre.
like
Sometimes
whether it's the rider is ready versus the horse.
Sure, right,
And
that too.
Yeah.
All right, Jaime, what's a funny story from you? One European story.
I don't like, nothing stands out. It's just kind of a
blur.
A blur, yeah. And just kind of like a learning curve. Like you just have moments where you're like, I literally am on the other side of the world. I have no idea what I'm doing, but off we go and we figure it out, right? Like that's half the battle is just getting shit done and figuring it out. and
that's what you learn in your life.
What you're doing the whole time.
I will say,
right.
And another thing I love about European shows is they feed us. We get our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And there's no better place to go than Rome because they give you free wine at dinner. And that's just, they keep on pouring. They keep on pouring.
They know how to make people happy.
How to keep people happy.
It becomes a party there at your dinner. Yeah.
Well, I think that is a big thing in Europe. Is it actually is a sport and it's treated as such, and it is a party, and it's a party for people coming to watch.
In general, just the parties in general. If you go to Lyon or Falsterbro, shows like this, they have legit parties. They
want everybody to have a good time.
And okay, I couldn't do it now, but like you get to the show, you unload your horses and you go straight to a party and you haven't slept in 24 hours.
Right. I mean, I remember even at the regional shows in Belgium that I would start at, and you start, in the morning and you have your young horses jumping, and there's plenty of people watching. But as the show goes on and the classes get bigger, the reason the Grand Prix, or at that time I was doing mini prix that were probably no bigger than meter 25, that the reason they're at 6 p.m. is that everybody's come after work or at the end of the day, and they're coming to watch and cheer people on and cheer their friends on because everybody knows horses there, and everybody
and I bet they have a
knows someone with a farm.
Beer and
right.
It's a great time.
It's like a football game here.
There's so much more of an environment at the shows in Europe than there is here. Like you go to a big show in Europe on a rainy Wednesday, and there's still a lot of people there watching, and there's people that are excited to be there, and they're cheering and clapping, and like not every show obviously, but like there's such an atmosphere over there that it gets you more pumped up, and it helps keep you excited to go to the ring for a big class. And then it just kind of turns into, after the class, after your horse is finished off, like, you want to go hang out with your friends. Whereas like here, it's just kind of like, oh my God, tomorrow's going to come very soon and your day is exhausting. And I think for me anyway, it's a bit harder to motivate at shows here than it is there, because like I said, there's just such an environment and such a hype for some shows over there that it gets you going and it keeps you going.
Yeah, and even over here, like you said, you want to go and you want to have motivation to go see your friends. At least in Europe, you all have your trucks, you're all parked together. Someone drops their ramp, pulls out a barbecue, and you're all sitting around having a barbecue. There could be 20 of you there. Here, you're going to go and you're going to spend $100 just to go have a nice dinner with someone on a Wednesday evening. You know, and you do your shop at the start of the week, throw it in your fridge in your truck, away you go. You have all your food there for the week, even though, like I said, you're getting your breakfast, lunch, and dinner for free anyway. But you do not spend a penny when you're away on the road in Europe.
Right. The art of the business side over here is much higher, and it's like concessions. Everything's to be purchased, and nothing is given away. This has been fun. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to any major?
I'm curious as to what that question Jaimie had. Maybe we get that in.
Oh, right. I forgot. Sorry. It's a simple question. It's not that exciting, but like, what was the hardest, say the first time you came to America from Europe, not even just horse show related or horse related? What was the hardest part for you to kind of get acclimated to being a European coming to America for the first time?
The heat in Florida.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Because believe it or not, I had never touched a jumper until I stepped foot in Florida for Darragh.
That's so crazy.
I never groomed for a European or anything. Or like, he's European, but I never groomed the European circuit until I did Florida first, and then I did the European circuit.
Well, Florida certainly is hotter than
it's quite the welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been really fun. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think people, if they can imagine showing in Europe, like it sounds really glamorous and, fancy. And actually it's more, I think it's more down to earth. They have fancy shows over there, but I just love that it is more down to earth and more, simpler, and everybody just kind of wants to have a party and have a good time. Yeah. Maybe a little bit more about the horse there. And I love these shows here too, but we've complicated it a little bit.
I think it's easier also to make friends, maybe, with fellow grooms in Europe.
Well, you have time, right? You're a little more, you're at the ring. It's a little more relaxed.
But it's also like Nickki was saying, it's like
a little village
of the like living in the lorries and everybody being together instead of like leaving at the end of the day and going to your separate places. And
yeah. I mean, it's a little more of a community, I would say, even though we're here, we all kind of retreat to our own separate homes at the end of each day there, and there's a little more community feeling, it seems.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you both joining. This was really fun.
Anytime. We could talk about things like this all day long.
Cool. Well, let's definitely do it again soon.